Hope everybody had a beautiful day today. So specifically today, I'm going to talk about how important is the states that we occupy. And what I mean by that is if we occupy a state of bliss, happiness, sadness, joy, anger, anxiety, our life reflects that. And we attract whatever we're exuding because we're like a magnet and we have the ability to attract. And so this is something I always heard, but I was never kind of sure what it actually meant until I actually experienced it myself. And so back when I was traveling through India, and this is when I was getting my business kind of started, and I was down to a point where I only had $50 left in my bank account. And I was traveling through India. I didn't know how I was going to pay for my food tomorrow, where I was staying. I had no idea whatsoever. None. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to put what I believe to test. I'm going to test this law of attraction thing. See what this is about. See if it's actually really true. See if I exist in that state. Can I attract something? And what I found out was it's completely true. And so what I did specifically was I got into a deep state of meditation through breath work, and I got into this trance-like state of bliss, and I just sat in this for as long as I could. It was about for a good 30, 45 minutes. I was just sitting in a state of bliss. Not worried about how I'm going to eat tomorrow or where I'm going to stay or where I'm going to get the money from. Any of that. Wasn't worried about it at all. Because when you're in a state of bliss, nothing else matters. And the only thing that matters when you're in a state of bliss is just the current moment. Because that's all that exists. That's all that's happening right now. And so the next day, after doing this, I literally get this phone call from this guy that wants me to help him. And so literally just after one phone call, and this was through a recommendation of a friend, that he's like, can you help me with this? And he wanted me to help him with his anxiety. And so it was just so out of the blue that I didn't even expect it to happen. And so that day, he sent me a payment, and I was able to eat that day, and I was able to find a place to stay, and I was set. I was set for another month. But just that specific instance really pulled my interest on this law of attraction. If you're being something, you'll attract it. And it's definitely true. Because this is something that goes into quantum physics. You know, there's cause and there's effect. And so if we live in the end, and this is something that Neville Goddard talks about, so we live in the effect of something that's happened to us, then we'll receive a cause for that effect. And so for me, being in that bliss-like state, I then attract a cause for me having been in that bliss-like state. So the thing that I needed most, of course, was money. And so I attracted an opportunity, a phone call, a client that would meet those needs. And hence, I was able to attract and pull in to my own reality what I needed. And I realized how powerful that was. Because I realized that this universe and this reality is much different than just this physical reality. There's a lot of underworkings to this reality that we don't quite understand. And that's not really openly talked about, through school and whatnot. I grew up in a super, super logical family, and I ultimately became an engineer before what I'm doing now, helping people. And so I used to see the universe, the world, through the lens that everything is physical. That all this energetic, all this energy, all this spiritual stuff didn't have any logical reasoning behind it. I couldn't logically justify all these things that I'd read about. And so I never believed it to be true. And so it was only having various circumstances like these that are unexplainable, where you're just like, this unexpected miracle that came my way when I got to a state of bliss has just kind of shown me really how powerful we are. And we can attract whatever it is that we want, whatever it is that we need. And it allowed me to provided me an element, rather, of trust. Of trusting what's in front of me. Trusting that I only know what the next step is. I don't know what comes after that next step, but I'm assuming that God, the universe, is going to allow for me to take that next step, and that there's not just going to be a hole in the ground and I'm just going to fall through it. I'm trustingly taking that step forward and moving forward, knowing that there's going to be ground ahead of me for me to take that step. And so that's the same thing with our life. If we move with that aspect of that feeling of trust that everything is going to work out, then it will. And this is extremely crucial specifically for any aspect, for any person, for whatever they're dealing with. Whether they're trying to make a business and they don't know how it's going to function, but if they just trust that it will, it ultimately will. And this is something I've talked about in earlier videos about how we plant seeds in the garden of our mind, in our subconscious. Our subconscious mind is like fertile soil, and the ideas and beliefs we can plant in our subconscious mind. And ultimately, if we trust in those seeds, we trust in those ideas, we trust in those beliefs, they will ultimately come to pass. And that's just a law of this world. And so ultimately, if we reside in a state that we want to feel, we live in that effect, a cause will come to find us. And we will be able to have whatever we want. And, when I first heard about these types of ideas, 5-6 years ago, I didn't believe it. And a lot of times when I talk to people, especially people that are super logical minded, they have a hard time accepting these types of ideas because it sounds like magic. But in reality, magic is something that just doesn't have a scientific, logical, easy explanation for these types of things. But that's something that's interesting about the quantum science, quantum physics. They're starting to understand that we can manipulate reality with our thoughts and with what we believe and what we hold as true. And that's something we can make possible. There's this interesting study about these people, and they wanted to see, how our thoughts affect the matter of this reality. And so they called a bunch of participants together, and they had them roll dice. So they had 2 dice, and so they had the participants that were rolling the dice think and have an intention of what they want to roll. And so, okay, I have 2 dice, I want to roll a 6. And so they would keep rolling the dice, and they would count the numbers, the results, and whatnot. And what they found was that it's statistically more likely that if they have an intention behind the roll, if I want to roll that 6, they're statistically more likely to roll that number 6. And so this is one of many different types of experiments where it shows that our thoughts influence matter, because our thoughts are literally vibrations, frequency. Everything in this world exists as energy, frequency, and vibrations. Everything. You know, this visible light spectrum that we can see, everything in front of me right here, this is a visible light wave spectrum. And then of course, the sounds that you're hearing, those are also a frequency. And that's the auditory scale of frequency. You know, 0 to 20,000 hertz is a typical human hearing. And so everything exists as a frequency. And so our thoughts exist as a frequency as well. Our emotions are a specific frequency as well. And so when we start to realize these things, we start to realize how powerful we are, and that we can have and attract whatever it is that we want. Because if we exist in that state, in that end state of whatever we want, that thing will come to find us. And so this isn't to say that you just get in that state and that you don't have to do any action anymore. That's not what this is about. This is about that if we pair this state with action, then it will ultimately come to us. Because when I got that client referred to me, it was from a good friend, and I really helped him. I really helped him improve his life, and he was going through really difficult times. And I made a huge transformation and a change in his life. And from that was a prior action. And so from that prior action, I was able to plant that seed. And so when I got in that state of bliss, it activated in my friend's mind, okay, here's somebody that I can refer to him. And this all happens at an unconscious level, clearly. This is not something that happens at a conscious level where my friend's like, oh, I sensed he meditated and he's in a state of bliss. He did his breath work, and so he needs my help. This isn't like a Batman call like that. No. This is something that happens at an unconscious level. Because you've noticed this sometimes too. If you ever think about somebody and then they end up calling you, or vice versa, you think of somebody and you think they need help, and you give them a call and they actually do need help. So things like that. So the subconscious mind, the unconscious mind, they basically run the show. And so when we're truly connected, we connect to these innate things with these vibrations, frequencies all around us, and we pick those up. And that's where we get like intuitive messages or just random thoughts. And so the fact that my friend unconsciously picked up this message, and he referred me that person, and that's what kept me going. And so this is something that I attribute to that, and I also attribute to God, because God has a big part in this as well. I think God is always taking care of us, and He always has our best interest at heart. And so specifically when we're following our highest path, then we'll always be taken care of. And that's something I've always found to be true during my path, during my journey here, that I was connected to myself. And it's something I found to always be true, because there's never been a moment where I wasn't taken care of. And so, you know, the whole idea of this message of the video is to trust everything's going to work out, but also get into the state where you can stay in a positive state so that you can attract what you want. But it also has to be coupled with action as well, because the fact that I left that imprint on my friend's mind about what I do and how I help people, it left an impact on his mind. And so that past action paired with the current state allowed me to make that change, allowed me to bring in that money that I needed in the moment when I only had $50 in my bank account and I was traveling through India. And I'm the type of person that I don't ask anybody for money, because I'm a man, and this is something I take very seriously, and I carry very high honor in the way that I do things. And so I don't ask people for money. I don't ask family for money. I don't do that when I was in that state, because it's like, if I don't get that money, then so be it. There's things I have to learn from that experience of not having that food, not having that shelter, that's going to teach me things. And so it's always a humbling experience to go through things like that and know that God always has your back, whether you want to call it the universe, whatever it may be for you. I don't believe in a specific religion. I just know that there's God, creator. But the essence is, the more that we stay in these high vibrational states, the better things will be for our life. Because if we're in a state of joy, we'll attract more. If we're in a state of happiness, we'll attract more things that make us happy. If we're in a state of bliss, we'll attract us miracles that give us that sensation of bliss, because that's who we are. Life reflects what we are, and that's it. Peace out. Sending love to everyone, and I hope you guys have an amazing week.